Welcome to You Are the Monarch, Transformation and Healing in the Education Space. And I have the honor of introducing Jacqueline Fabian, who's a National Board Certified Teacher, a Senior Manager of Candidate Experience, DEI, at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, is a former English and Social Studies teacher and school leader. She leads professional development on anti-racist practices and culturally responsive teaching, and is a member of the Teach to Change Now collaborative as well. So let's welcome Jacqueline Fabian.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you are here today. I feel like this space is going to transition really well from the keynote that we just heard. So I'm really excited to be in community with you today. I see that we have a couple of people from Missouri, and Marisol and I are from Chicago. So as you can see, the LEC, just like Sophia said a little bit earlier this morning, it really expands all across the country. There are lots of us here in Chicago as well. And so hopefully one day we will all be, together in one space. But we are really happy to be here today virtually with you. So our objectives for today, the LEC really was a community for me. And so what I'm hoping in this session today is that you find a little bit more of community with some fellow educators. My hope is that we also understand the power of our stories, and we'll practice a little bit of writing to begin or continue our own healing. Now, as Sophia mentioned in her keynote, a lot of us have gone through so much in the last 2 years. And so I want to touch on that a little bit, talk a little bit about that, and then also, guide you through some practices, so that way we can all, again, just be in community with one another and really work towards that path of healing and transformation. I see a couple of other people joining the call. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to go ahead and put your name in the chat, and let us know where you're from. We would love to see who is here with us today. So the agenda is as follows. We'll do just some very brief introductions and go over some community agreements. If you can please just put your name and your location in the chat, that would be wonderful. We're going to do a little bit of sharing today. So the more that we can see who is, in the room, the more we'll be willing to, talk to one another and share with one another, as we really begin or continue this path of healing. I'm going to give you a little bit of context for this presentation today, tell you a little bit about my story, which when Sophia was talking, it was very, very similar to a lot of her own experiences. And so, her being from Chicago, me being from Chicago, I think a lot of us, Latinx teachers in the area can very much, relate to a lot of just what we've been through. We'll do a little bit of writing practice, and then we will do some share outs and close out our time together. So a couple of community agreements before we get started. This is going to be a brave space. This is going to help us in really building our path towards healing and transformation. So that way we could do all of the things that Sophia was talking about in her keynote, right? Where we are able to continue our advocacy work, where we can be present for our families, for our students. We want to engage and be present. I am totally fine with everyone having their camera off if that's what you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable having your camera on, it would be great to see your face. But either one is perfectly okay in this space. Obviously, we want to take space and make space. What is heard here stays here, and what's learned here leaves here. I think you're going to be getting a copy of this slide deck. We were all raised in a white supremacist culture, and we all have work to do, and that's okay. And so really getting into, what that looks like, and really understanding the space in which we've all grown up in is really going to also help us in our healing and our transformation. And lastly, we're going to, acknowledge that impact is distinct from intent. Now, these are the community agreements that Delia and I have used when we did our book club together. As I've mentioned, the LEC has been really my home for the last couple of years. I think we're working on 3 years now. And, I've been able to be blessed with opportunities to present at conferences for them, to be a part of book clubs and help present book clubs, to educators across the country. So the more that you're involved with the LEC, the more that you'll find that community. And that's really what I hope that we leave here with today. So this is called You Are the Monarch. So why the monarch, right? When I was thinking about what I wanted to title this, it was the first image that came to mind. Now, part of my story is more recently, I lost my grandmother back in June. And a lot of people, as we were working through our grief, a lot of people said, well, anytime you see a monarch, you will see, your grandmother. And so I think that image has been in my head for a little while now. And so when I had to come up with this title, I wanted to use that as a space to kind of talk about all the things that embody who we are. We are strength. We are in this education space for a reason. We have that strength and we have the ability to make an impact. We are change. We want to do right by our students. We want to impact what our communities are doing. We want to continue impacting the teacher workforce. That's why you're here today. But we also understand that we are going through our own transformations, right? We've had a tumultuous couple of years, whether you're in the classroom, whether you're out of the classroom, whether you're contemplating leaving the classroom. We've all gone through so much over the last couple of years. And so we've really got to find our space and our healing in order to transform, in order to be the best for our community. We are also endurance. We wouldn't have been able to make it through these last couple of years if we didn't have that endurance. And I think sometimes we don't stop and pause and think about how far we've come over these last couple of years. We're evolution, right? We've had to continually evolve who we are, what we believe, how we structure our classrooms, how we structure our communities. I really realized during the pandemic how much trauma I was holding inside of me. I was in the classroom for 13 years, and it took that long for me to realize how much I was holding on to. And it wasn't until I found the LEC, and it wasn't until I found a network through the national board network for teachers of color, that I was able to find a community. Now, I had grown up in a community, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I grew up in a community that was predominantly white. I didn't really have many friends who looked like me, who understood my culture. And I think because I was raised in a community like that, my dad, who was Mexican and grew up speaking Spanish, he didn't teach me Spanish. And I really sit with that a lot, especially when I'm in these spaces, because sometimes I really struggle with that identity piece, right? And lastly, the monarch embodies the spirit of our ancestors. Now, like I said, a lot of people, once my grandmother passed away, said, anytime you see a monarch, you're going to be thinking about your grandmother. And I think about all of my ancestors and all of my grandparents who are enveloping me in their spirit. And I'm here today because of them. All 4 of my grandparents came to this country and they wanted a better life for their kids. They wanted a better life for their grandkids. And in the span of just 2 generations, I'm so blessed with where we've come. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here. So that's why the monarch, and that's why I want you all to really think about, how do you embody this symbol? So I've touched a little bit on this. As we think about transformation and healing and education today, I want you just to briefly think about everything that we've been through. This is only what has gone on in education, let alone what's going on in our personal lives. We've had pandemic teaching where we had to pivot in a moment's notice. I was a department chair when we went remote, and having to explain what the landscape of education was going to be like for a group of 13 teachers was frightening. It was scary because it was all unknown. And those teachers, they were scared and they didn't know how to handle it. But together, we worked together to really get to a space where we could be there for our students and be there for each other, which was really the most important part. There's also been several political attacks on teachers and on students. And we have to sit with that every day. How are we able to be advocates for our colleagues? How are we able to be advocates for our students? It's a lot to carry for one person. And especially, and I don't know how many of you feel this or have experienced this, but in a lot of the schools that I was in, I was the only teacher of color. And so any diversity initiative, anything having to do with students of color, I was the teacher that was approached. And I did it and I loved it. And it was my passion. And it was something that, I was so grateful to be a part of. But that's a lot for one teacher to shoulder, 2 teachers even to shoulder. And so if you've been that teacher, you know what that feels like. Once we, were able to kind of get our footing through pandemic teaching, then we had the racial reckoning of 2020, where we had to really think about, what is our place in this community? What is our place in these conversations? How do we support our colleagues? How do we support our students? How do we continue to advocate for communities of color? And then, again, going back to those attacks, more focus on culturally responsive teaching, which many of us were probably already doing before there was this title put on it, right? Because we knew what it was like to be students in those environments where it was not culturally responsive. And if you were able to be in a school and have an education where your culture was represented and it was nurtured, that's wonderful. And I wish I had that experience. So I've been carrying this trauma for a very, very long time. And of course, all of us educators are in the middle of all of this. And we're shouldering all of this happening at one time. And we're still doing it. We're still seeing the effects of pandemic teaching. We're still seeing the effects of, figuring out ways to advocate. So a little bit about my story. I started teaching in 2008. I was in a school, in a suburban school district in the suburbs of Chicago called Bolingbrook. It was a high school. We had almost 4,000 students, if you can believe that. The school was huge. And it was predominantly students of color. We were 75% students of color. Many of the students were on the free and reduced lunch program. And it was only 5 minutes away from where I grew up. And it couldn't have been more different. And what I really started to realize the second that I stepped foot in that school, how under-resourced the school was, and how the students were reading texts. I was an English teacher. Students were reading texts and doing activities that did not resonate with them. They were reading books that were harmful and traumatizing. And so I learned very early on ways in which I could make my curriculum more responsive. And it took a while because I was raised in almost the exact same culture, in almost the exact same education space. And so, you know, I was really grateful to finally be in a space where students, you know, looked like me. And I'll never forget, there was one day where I think it was even maybe the first day of school, where a student came up to me and asked, you know, what are you? And, you know, I was like, I'm Mexican. And the student looked at me very wide-eyed and he was like, what? You are? And at first I didn't know how to react to it, right? But then I was like, yeah. And all the other students heard this and they were like, that's so cool. We've never had a teacher who was Hispanic before. And that's when it hit me. And I was like, wow, I had one in all the years of my education, from kindergarten, preschool, even up until up until I went to college. Never did I have one except for one, my AP 5 Spanish teacher. And that's it. And so once I was in this community, I fell in love with it. I made so many wonderful connections with students, and I carried all of that learning with me for years. And so I was so grateful to have that opportunity and to be able to be in that community. Once COVID hit, and once we were doing that pandemic teaching, and once I really started to reflect on a lot of the harmful structures in some of the schools that I'd been in, I really started to realize that maybe the impact that I could make was not in the classroom, but outside of it. Now, my whole identity was to be a teacher. And so I didn't really know how to reckon with that. And I had to do a lot of healing inside of myself, a lot of therapy, a lot of writing, a lot of meditation, to really be okay with the fact that I wasn't going to be a teacher anymore. And so that's when I transferred out of the classroom and I joined National Board, which is a nonprofit education organization. A lot of you might have heard about it because we are a certifying body. And so what I've been able to do since I've been out of the out of the classroom, I've been able to do more work with the LEC. I've been able to, present at several conferences. I've coached new teachers. I've done so many things because I took the time to really seek out that healing practice. And so that's really what I hope for us today. So Sophia talked a lot about our stories and how important they are. And I was really inspired by an activity and a session that the LEC hosted a while back about our stories and how important those stories are. And I've taken this teaching and I've had the LEC present at National Board webinars. And I've joined these writing practices. And so I want to share a little bit about that with you today. Now, trauma-informed healing is never linear. It's going to be messy. And what the beautiful thing about writing is it can help us process our emotions, heal our trauma, and, whether it's been over the last couple of years, whether it's been in our entire lives. And then we're able to share our stories and really use our stories to impact our communities and impact the education space. I've done writings for Ed Week. I've been able to participate in other writing activities with other teachers of color. I've been so grateful for what writing has allowed me to do in the education space to raise awareness and uplift voices for teachers who for a very long time weren't heard. Now, I found this statistic and I thought it was really interesting. The Latinx Experience, or the Latinx Experience, really focuses on a couple of things. There's a loss of connection to themselves, to your bodies, to families, to others, and to the world around us. We have intense fear, terror, and lack of control. We have a sense of threats sometimes. We feel that inside. And I've linked an article called Overcoming Generational Trauma. Now, my father's experience is very similar to a lot of this. But in, our culture, a lot of times it's not really talked about that one should seek therapy, that one should seek healing. And so I want to provide that space today. So a couple of things that we can continue to do in order to heal. I want us to think about recognizing our boundaries, whether that's with family, whether that's with work, whether that's with colleagues, friends. It's taken me a long time to realize that while I love my family, I am my own person, and that's okay. And I can be a little selfish in that, which brings me to prioritizing myself and my self-care. And I encourage you all to think through that a little bit too. And then also being vulnerable with our stories and with our space. The practice that we're going to work on today in the next couple of minutes is going to allow you to think through writing, just being vulnerable and being able to share and craft our stories. So what I would love to do over the next 10 or so minutes is I would love for you to share one of the, write a little bit, get a journal, get a Google Doc, whatever works best for you. I'm a paper and pen gal. And what I would love for you to do is choose one of the following prompts and spend a little bit of time writing through one of these prompts. And if you want to combine a couple together, that's fine too. I think they all kind of intersect with one another. So prompt number 1, what emotions from the past are you still holding on to? In what ways have you connected to your identity in order to heal? How have you honored self-love through these last few years? I give you a prompt here. Something I wish others knew about being in education today is. And then lastly, if you're so compelled, write a letter to yourself to begin your healing journey. So I'm going to put the clock. We'll come back around 11:28. I encourage you to just take this time, write things down. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be beautiful. What I would love is for all of us to just share a little bit, through our writing. So I'm going to go off camera. I, encourage all of you to just take some time, write some bullet points, write down a paragraph. Again, it could be a complete brain dump, and it does not have to be beautiful. That's not the purpose of this activity today. But I would just love and encourage you to choose one of these prompts and begin writing. All right. So I hope you were able to take this time to reflect a little bit, get to know your story. My hope is that this exercise will allow you to continue crafting and working through your stories so that you'll be able to use them in maybe a more public space, if that is what you are so encouraged to do. What I would love for us to do now is to do a little bit of a share out. I had anticipated doing this in just breakout rooms, but since we are a tiny bunch today, I figure we could just all stay in one room and just kind of do some of this practice together. There is no, pressure for you to share. I found the sharing to be quite healing. But if you are just not in a place for that today, that is absolutely okay. So I'm going to mute myself. You all are able to unmute. So please go ahead and if anyone wants to go ahead and start by just sharing what you wrote, please go ahead and do so.
Hello. My name is Consuelo. I want to share with you something I wish others knew about being in education today is that it is challenging, it is empowering. It requires having the bravery to speak up when you see injustice going on in your classroom, even when it makes you feel scared to do so. It demands a lot of hard work to stay committed to transform students' lives. It usually requires forgetting our personal struggles and doing our best to stay positive and bring life to our students' days. It requires walking the extra mile to disrupt systemic practices and advocating for change, especially in spaces that are not inclusive enough for future teachers of color. That's something I wish others knew about being in education today is.
Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, that really touched my heart. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyone else like to share?
I can go ahead and share. In looking at all these questions, it seemed like I wanted to do all of them, and then I was like, no, I should just focus on one. But these are all great questions to really sit back and think and help you reflect. And as I was writing, something I guess I hold in, or that I think about a lot, is growing up alone, even though I am one out of 4 other siblings, but kind of like alone with where my parents had to work a lot. And so a lot of it led to me going to school alone, like with my siblings, but not so much with parent involvement. And so now being a teacher, I see that in my own kindergartners, and I can tell right away, like, oh, this child spends more time at grandma's and grandpa. And I kind of know, like, if the parents are around a lot or they're not. And so I just try to always capture pictures, like first day pictures for everyone, like, or like a special celebration picture, and share with the parents, because I wish I had that. And so now, like, I try to do that for my students, and to have those moments, to have those memories, even if like the parent was out because they had to work 2 shifts to, bring food to the table or to pay rent. So that's how I am kind of healing from the process. But it's something that I think about, and it's hard. It's hard. And I understand my parents' perspective at that point, at that time, and understand why it had to be done that way. So I just take it upon my students, and try to kind of be that middle person to help get those memories out, and happy moments, I guess.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I love how responsive that is. You saw that there was a need, and you did something about that. And I love that. And I think that so many of us you know, take it upon ourselves to make sure that, you know, our students, you know, have everything that they need. You know, so thank you. Who else would like to share? I'm pretty good with my teacher wait time. So feel encouraged to share. Angela, thank you so much for sharing out in the chat. Would you mind if I read that out loud, or would you just like to keep it in the chat? Whatever is, I don't know if you just can't unmute, but
oh, sorry. I have
it's okay.
unstable connection, so that's why I'm on mute. But hopefully this is coming through. But feel free to share it out. I mean, I'm fine with you talking and sharing it out.
Sure.
I'm afraid my connection is really unstable.
Yeah. Great. So this is what Angela put in the chat. I decided to reflect on how I can support my Latinx education majors where I am a professor. I am white, but I definitely understand trauma from my own personal situations as a child and teen. However, I decided this was not a time to think about any of my own situations, but how I can support, listen, and show love to the students, to let the students know I see them and hear them. I hope this all came out in a way that I hear you and see you. I love that because it really reflects on the need for advocates and allies and co-conspirators. Sophia talks a lot about, you know, the Bettina Love today. She quoted her a couple of times, and this very much, you know, I guess partners with a lot of the teachings of Bettina Love in terms of, you know, are you an ally? Are you a co-conspirator? You know, how do you get from ally to co-conspirator, right? And so Angela, you know, just sharing and listening and hearing, you know, is a giant first step in making sure that, you know, you're doing what's best for your Latinx students. So I love that perspective, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. Yeah, and Consuelo says in the chat, you know, we need you. We need voices in this community who are, you know, not a part of our community, right? And, you know, just like we can be advocates and allies for others, we need that as well. Again, I think so much of the power of the LEC is there's so many ways in which they teach how we can be advocates and allies, and how we can use our voices to uplift and be there for one another. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else like to share their writing? And it's okay if you put it in the chat and we can either read it or I can voice over it. Anyone else? Yeah. Like Marisol said, please feel free to share in the chat. Okay. Well, I appreciate all of you taking the time to think through what you wanted to write about today. I'll put the prompts up just one more time so you can see these. I do think that you will get a copy of the slide deck so you can see these. I use these a lot of times when I'm just trying to, if I know that I'm feeling, you know, some of that discomfort, I try to use one of these in order to really think about just what, you know, what I need to continue doing to keep healing, because it's never going to end, right? And so the more that we keep, you know, focusing on getting our feelings out on paper, the more that, you know, we're able to do that. Emma, thank you so much for sharing. I will go ahead and share this out for you. So she says, I have honored self-love through the last few years by starting therapy for all the trauma I suffered and sharing what I've learned with my students, since there is a stigma on talking therapy as a Latina. Only if you're crazy, you go to therapy. I know I've heard that before. I'm not only healing myself, but helping my students learn that it's okay to ask for help or go to therapy for help. Thank you so much for that message. That is a very profound and very important reflection. I touched on this very, very briefly at the beginning of this session. And, you know, I think sometimes I'm still working through my own feelings about it, but I grew up hearing all the time about therapy and how it was bad. And I still don't even talk to, you know, my parents much about therapy. And I've been in therapy for over 12 years. And so, you know, there is a stigma, and the more that we talk about it and the more that we are honest and transparent about our, you know, our experiences, the more that then, you know, the younger generations will know that it's okay. So I love that. I always love the slogan, it's okay to not be okay. And I think that, you know, sharing that with students and younger generations, I think that's so, so important. Consuelo, you said something earlier where, you know, you have to do what's right for your students and be brave enough to do that. And I think sometimes, especially if you're working with a predominantly Latinx community, sometimes that is the really brave conversation to talk about, you know, your own, you know, reflections through therapy or through healing and self-love and respecting oneself, right? And I love that. And I think it's so important, you know, Consuelo, like you said in the chat, that it's, you know, it's okay. You should be modeling, you know, what that looks like. So thank you so much, because it's certainly not talked about enough. Right. I think at the beginning of 2021 was when I did one of my first, I can't remember what we called it, but I think it was something around self-love for the LEC. And we only had one person show up that particular time, but we sat there for an entire hour, me, Edgar, and this one teacher, and we just talked through all the ways in which we were able to find healing through our culture. And something that she brought up was, you know, the fact that she was very religious, and that she really relied on religion and the power of the healing power of prayer to get her through really tough moments. And so again, like if that's, you know, your therapy, and if that's something that really resonates with you, that's okay too. But I think just acknowledging, like, I need help. That's wonderful. And, you know, again, it's something that isn't talked about enough, and we need it, and that's okay. So thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. I know it's hard, and I appreciate you acknowledging that this is a brave space and that we are all here to support one another. So thank you so much for, you know, uplifting each other. So one thing that I would love to hear is, as a closing reflection in the chat, or if you want to unmute, you are more than welcome to do that as well. What is one radical act you could commit to ensure you are on your path towards healing? What is one thing that you can, you know, hold yourself accountable to? And secondly, what will you do with this story? What is something that, you know, is it just for you? Do you want to share it with somebody? Do you want to write a longer piece? What is something that you will do with what you wrote today? So if you just want to take a moment to reflect and add that in the chat, or feel free to unmute, feel free to go ahead and do that. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up our session. I can't believe an hour has gone by already. Please go ahead and share out these two questions. Taking time to process your emotions is so important. Yeah, taking a couple breaths, that's okay. continuing to share stories, so important. Anytime you see the LEC do a workshop on storytelling, I would encourage you to join. I know they're sometimes very quickly after school if you are in the classroom, but they are so powerful. Continuing to model. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I so appreciate you being here today. I am going to add my Twitter handle in the chat so you have that. And so we can connect, but thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day at the conference today. And again, I really appreciate everyone sharing and being here in community with one another. Really, really appreciate all of you being here today. So thank you. And there's a Jamboard if anyone wants to share any takeaways that is in the chat. Thank you, Sebastian, for sharing that. Thank you so much.